Welcome back. Now, with just 13 days left before the highly anticipated 2024 general elections, the Human Sciences Research Council this week hosted a dialogue on the viability of political party coalitions in South Africa. The hybrid dialogue, which was held at the CSIR in Pretoria, was to share the findings and the public's perceptions on coalitions. Now, at the dialogue, Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller, Divisional Executive in Developmental, Capable and Ethical State, shared some of the research that the HSRC had conducted through the institution's in-house South African Social Attitude Survey, which the HSRC runs annually. Professor Bohler-Muller joins us now virtually to share some of those findings. Professor, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
So perhaps a good place to start would be to look at the question that was asked by the HSRC to the public, and also just to get a sense of whether they were in favor of a single party government or a multi-party government, and which of course they found worked better, or they think would work better for South Africa's democracy. So what did the public say?
They said a lot, as they are saying today, as we near the elections. We really wanted to know whether people were in support of coalition government or not, because we have had coalition governments in South Africa before, starting with the Government of National Unity. So we asked this question in 2014 and again in 2023, last year. About a third of South Africans are in support of coalition government, which was a higher number than we actually expected, but it dropped from 2014 at 39% to 2023 at 30%. So there has been a drop. We think that drop may be as a result of the fact that there's a lot of media around failed municipal elections. And of course, this affects service delivery. So that was the general feeling of the public. But I think South African voters are more mature than we realize. And they were also reasonably happy to accept a coalition government, if necessary, as long as there is service delivery. So there seems to be a move away from party loyalty or political ideology as the number one reason to vote for a political party. And we're more likely to see people vote if they believe that this political party or possibly a coalition would provide better basic services to communities. And I thought that that was a very interesting outcome.
Indeed. And Prof, you touched on the media and how this impacts on people's perception of coalition governments, whether they work or not. So could you kindly just give us some examples of how you think the media influences that perception, especially in terms of what they tend to focus on, and perhaps some examples of coalition governments that actually do work?
Well, there are 70 coalition governments at municipal level at the moment. And we very, very seldom see the good stories around, and some of them work. Probably the majority of those coalitions work. But we often hear about infighting in Gauteng in particular. Infighting, it's politicians' egos that come to the fore. This is very newsworthy, of course. But the problem is that it does affect service delivery. So we focus on the politicians having arguments with one another, the various switches in leadership, whereas there are some instances where parties have gotten together, set aside their differences, and actually focused on communities and the people. And I can't think of a particular one right now, but I do know that out of the 70 coalition governments at local government level, a number do work, and we're not looking at those. We're only looking at the ones that fail.
And I think that this will present an opportunity for us to actually go back and take a look a lot more closely at some of these coalition arrangements and where they actually function well. Now, Prof, you also said that South Africans are not as naive as they are often made out to be. So you say that South Africans would rather have service delivery than being party loyalists. What are the people most disillusioned about, though, about our democracy?
I think there's a feeling of despondency about the future, and the fact that people really feel that it is their duty to vote, but they feel that their voices and their votes don't matter. And that's really, really sad. 70% of South Africans believe that it's their duty to vote, and not that they're all registered, of course, but only 33% of South Africans believe that their vote matters. Now, there must be something there that is wrong. And I think it is precisely because of the fact that South Africans feel that democracy is not working for them. That's another finding of ours over a period of 20 years. The South African Social Attitude Survey has been doing this research for 20 years. And slowly but surely, there is this disillusionment. And I think the reason is that the levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment in South Africa are just not acceptable. And we heard about youth unemployment figures about 2 days ago at 45%. And the youth are feeling despondent and hopeless, and they're starting to give up. And that's not what we need for the future leaders of this country.
So, Prof, I'm curious to know whether you dug a little deeper in terms of this despondency, because if people feel that this democracy is not working for them, do they feel that it's the system of democracy that we currently employ in South Africa, or do they feel that there are certain provisions catered for within that democracy that are problematic?
That's a very good question. I think that the general feeling is that democracy, is a slow moving system where you need to participate, reach consensus, and that's all very nice and well. But the system is slower than in, for example, the Asian tigers. Where authoritarianism delivers. People are brought out of poverty, but the decision-making is quick because of the fact that we don't have to go through all these systems. And I think so it's partially the system and then partially the way the system works in South Africa. But the rise in people who feel that authoritarianism may be an alternative to consider is slightly disturbing.
Well, very interesting sentiment that. But of course, with the prospects of greater coalition arrangements post the 29th of May looming, are people feeling hopeful? Are they hopeful that there could be better service delivery? Are they hopeful that the political parties may make a greater effort to make these coalition arrangements work, Prof?
I get the feeling there seems to be a feeling of anticipation and possibility. There's a lot of speculation and we cannot predict what's going to happen, but coalitions often lead to stronger democracy because you have political parties who have to start working with one another, who need to make compromises where diverse voices are put together in terms of looking at policies. And so we come up with something that's perhaps a little bit better. As long as these governments and the politicians themselves put the South Africans, the people of South Africa first. And that's what people are looking for and hoping for. Because if you're a single party, there's no need for compromise. But if you are entering into a multi-party coalition, there's a much more need for planning, for careful deliberations around issues, if you want it to work, of course. And we're hoping, I think the country is hoping that we have a richer democracy, if we do land up with the coalition government, because I think there's a lot of nostalgia looking back at the government of national unity and the way that everybody felt that they belonged, everybody felt that they were included. And that's probably something that we need to consider going forward.
Well, Prof, thanks so much for your time. We have to leave it there, unfortunately. Professor Narnia Bohler-Muller is Divisional Executive in the Developmental, Capable and Ethical State at the HSRC, and discussing with us there some of the findings on the South African public's attitudes and perceptions on multi-party coalitions. And this, of course, with 13 days to go before South Africans will know what happens to our country after the elections and whether coalitions will come into play in a big way.